Hello, prynhawn da, croeso, welcome, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. We've got a number of people joining.
Gyfarod.
Croeso pawb. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, prynhawn da. Okay, as we're waiting for people to arrive, fel arfer, as usual, it would be lovely to hear where you're from, or even what you're having for lunch. Maybe it's that time of day. It's a little bit early, maybe for some, but just dydwch hello, say hello in the chat. A dydwch o ble ti'n dod, be ti'n neud, what you're up to, where you're from. It would be just lovely to hear from you in the chat while we're waiting for people to arrive. We'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started. I've got a very scenic view today, so I'm up in Llandudno, right on the front in our Leading Modern Public Services training session. But we're in Fenyw Cymru, which is looking directly out over Llandudno Bay. It's absolutely beautiful here. Okay. I think the numbers have slowed down a little bit now. Elise, what do you think? Are we ready to roll?
Yeah, I'm happy to get started, Pete.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Right, we'll begin. Prynhawn da, croeso cynnes i chi gyd. Diolch yn fawr am ddod ac ymuno â ni. Great to see you all. Thank you very much for joining. Good afternoon and welcome. We are recording this session, very important point. So if you do not want to appear in the recording, please make sure your camera's off. I can see everybody's very, very polite and I've got their microphones muted as well. We'll have time for question and answers at the end as usual, but during the presentation, I'm going to ask you to keep your microphones on mute if you would, please. And we're getting ready to start. So delighted to say we've got another data science seminar today, but we've got some special guests. And we are joined today by Alexander Fitzpatrick, who's going to start off, and Joe, who's going to be joining us in just a moment as well. We're going to be looking at, as you can see on the screen, the title, Sustainable, Efficient and Effective Transitions to a Modern Analytical Infrastructure. Fascinating stuff. And without any further ado from me, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to start the session. Hi, Alex.
Hello, thank you, Pete. I think Joe is going to share the slides for me, so hopefully they will magically appear on the screen any moment. While they're appearing, I'll kick off. So good afternoon, everyone. I think it is afternoon now. Yeah. So I'm Alex Fitzpatrick, and I am the head of labour market and skills statistics in Welsh Government. But alongside labour market and skills stats, I am also supporting the Sustainable, Efficient and Effective Transformation Programme, or SEE for short, within our Knowledge and Analytical Services Department. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So I'm first going to cover what it is that we're aiming to achieve with this programme, why we need to do it, and how we have approached the challenge. I'll then hand over to my colleague Joe, who will be talking through a case study and show you a working example of a process that has been transformed and explain some of the benefits that this has brought. As Pete said, if you have any questions, I have allowed some time at the end of each section for these, but please also feel free to pop any questions you may have in the chat and I can pick these up when possible. Next slide, please, Joe. So the main aim of the SEE transformation programme is this mission here in the bluey green box. It states by the end of 2025, we aim for our analytical infrastructure and ways of working to be sustainable, efficient and effective. But what does sustainable, efficient and effective mean? So for sustainable, we are looking for teams within our department to be skilled in relevant analytical tools such as R and Python as well as others, and that we can operate within our budget both now and in the future. We also want to ensure that our infrastructure and our ways of working are kept in line with the Welsh Government's data strategy as that evolves. In terms of efficiency, we are looking to ensure that our ways of working are faster and more consistent across teams, and that all of our regular processes are reproducible, and that we prioritise activities that have a clear user need. And then finally, in terms of effectiveness, we want to ensure that the skills that we hold within our department are valued and utilised, and looking to change our work to reflect this will hopefully also allow us additional time to add further insight and context to our work so that our users are increasingly satisfied with what we're delivering. Next slide, please, Joe. So a little background as to why we are doing this and also why we're doing this now. So a lot of the systems and the processes that teams across our department use either involved licensed software such as SAS or SPSS, or use legacy software such as Microsoft Access or Excel. And we want to ensure that we're bringing forward our processes for all these reasons outlined here in the green boxes. So it brings more flexibility, ownership and control, rather than legacy processes that have built up over many, many years and are now quite hard to change. It also provides better user experience. So there are better processing speeds, which means that teams are able to spend less time on manual repetitive steps and add that value in that context that I previously mentioned. There will also be both quality and value added, with a reduction in error and a focus on that added value. It's more cost effective. So adopting this approach will also mean that we don't need to pay for separate data collection platforms, and we don't need to pay for specialist software because we are adopting these new systems and processes. There'll also be a greater consistency in the ways of working, which means that skills and knowledge can be shared across teams within our department and are more easily transferable. And finally, it's consistent with the direction that other analysts in government are moving in. So we have people arriving in Welsh Government now with these skills, and we want to ensure that we encourage and make the most of those. Next slide, please, Joe. So to deliver this programme across our division, we have established a group of colleagues and have split the work into different work streams in order to support teams within the department as best as we can. So firstly, we have the capability work stream. So this is very much looking to upskill and build on resources. They help identify capability requirements and establish mechanisms to address these. This work stream also identifies and establishes training solutions and works with our statistical development group to provide these training solutions. The next work stream looks at capacity requirements. So obviously, if we want to do all this work, we need to find some capacity to be able to do it. Although there are going to be time-saving kind of benefits from a lot of this transformation work, you need to find that time in the first place to be able to implement it. So our capacity work stream looks at the requirements that are critical to delivering that vision and have developed a framework to help teams with their decision making and that they can use to create capacity. And then finally, we have our coordination and prioritisation work stream. So they work to prioritise requirements across the department to enable the delivery of the other two work streams. And they also work with teams to identify their priorities and then use this information to help deploy collective resources and identify any further opportunities for collaborating and coordinating. Next slide, please, Joe. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I thought it would be worth just very quickly talking through our timelines and priorities and how we've gone about sort of approaching this. So the programme has been split into 4 distinct blocks, and this is what we have used to determine how best we use our existing skills and expertise that we have available to us. Ultimately, the entire programme is built on team-led transformation, where each team within our division is responsible for the transformation of their own processes. But the team transformation plans do not need to stick rigidly to this timeline, and where they have the skills and capacity to move faster, they have been encouraged to do so. But that took a quick outline of sort of how we've gone about attacking this challenge, because obviously, as you can imagine, across an entire department, there are a lot of things that want to be transformed. Next slide, please, Jo. So what have we achieved so far? So since the start of this transformation programme, we've halved the number of SaaS licenses that we use across the department. We have assigned specialists to work with teams to help support the transformation of existing and remaining SaaS processes, with the view to further reduce the number of licenses that we need. We've transformed the number of systems already, with a lot of teams adopting RAP for their statistical releases and processes. We've developed best practice ways of working in R, SQL and Azure DevOps, and we've produced associated guidance. And we've also provided and facilitated a number of training sessions, as well as organising case study sharing sessions, one of which you will see later, to support the development of new skills. Next slide, please, Jo, thank you. So comms has been incredibly important throughout this programme to ensure that our colleagues are aware of what's happening, when certain things need to take place, and why this is the case. And because this is a departmental programme, we want to ensure that all colleagues are involved in the process and have the opportunity to contribute, as well as having any information needed available to them. So there are a number of different ways that we communicate updates and request feedback from colleagues, which include a Teams channel where we provide updates from our weekly C transformation catch-up. So this allows colleagues to see what was discussed each week and what we are working towards. We also have a regular slot at our quarterly stats forum, which we use to either provide information to colleagues or to engage in discussion. And then in addition to the Teams channel and the regular stats forum slot, we have also started a monthly email update, which circulated to all staff in stats and includes a temperature check survey, which provides the opportunity to gather and act on feedback at a much faster pace, a latest news section, which highlights any key updates that we want to ensure everyone is aware of. We also try and address one FAQ each month to help understanding or clarify expectations on certain topics. Some dates for diaries are included, such as upcoming training sessions. And then in addition, there is a section on useful resources, which usually provides any links relevant to the updates or the FAQs, and also the area on our internal system where all of our resources are saved. Next slide, please. So I thought it might also be useful just to quickly cover some of the training and resources that we have put in place to help support our colleagues and support the C transformation programme, in case anyone on the call today is looking to adopt something similar. In no particular order, we've created a CAS code catalogue, which is a central repository of coding tools that includes easy to find guidance on common uses of code and examples of gold standard code created within our department. As part of that code catalogue, we have also created packages for departmental use that avoid duplication and focuses on consistent formatting and creation of statistical outputs. We have established R and Python, SQL and RAP Teams channels for individuals to use to communicate with each other and others working on similar things. Now, that's been incredibly useful, where colleagues may be stuck on something and can just seek advice or guidance from someone who's already worked through something similar previously. We've organised Azure DevOps training and use across CAS with instructions on how to use and contribute to collaborative resources and how to save and quality assure team-specific projects. And as I mentioned briefly before, we've compiled a list of all relevant resources and we share this regularly. And because we ensure that all training sessions that we put on are also recorded, that list of resources just continues to grow. We have used the monthly temperature check survey to identify topics to run how-to sessions on, with the first of these taking place at the end of the month, actually. We have facilitated case study sharing sessions. I mentioned that you'll have the joy of listening to Joe later on, talking in depth of some of the really great work that they've done in the team and the benefits that that's brought, which also enables colleagues to learn from each other's experiences. And we've also promoted collaboration and similar ways of working across our entire department to ensure that it's easy to move between teams and that expertise can be shared. Next slide, please, Joe. And now what next? So as we move into the next phase of the project, the scope of what's included in this becomes much larger. So where the previous phase focused on licensed software, the next phase focuses on all processes using legacy software. The way that we are approaching this is by each team within the division having a transformation plan. And within that plan, it will outline the processes that are in scope of the programme and what the team plan to do to work towards the transformation of these. These plans also provide the opportunity for teams to highlight any potential issues with capability and/or capacity, which our work streams can then look to support. There's just a little bit in the boxes then around the work that we continue to do as part of our work streams as well, but I won't go into loads of detail in that. If anyone has any questions, just let me know. If you pop to the next slide then, that is everything. Now, I appreciate that was a lot of information. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer now, or if you wanted to follow up after today, I've also put our transformation mailbox on this slide that I'd be happy to pick up any, or in the chat afterwards.
Well, if there's no questions for now, then shall I jump on and start with the case study?
Yeah, I was wondering how long do I wait? I'll hand over to you now, Joe. Thank you very much, and I'll keep an eye on the chat if anyone does have any questions.
Perfect. So hi everyone, my name's Joe and I work in the labour market and skills stats team alongside Alex. And we thought it'd be good just to give a quick case study of one of the releases that we've transformed in our team, just to give you an idea of what we've done, how we've gone about the process, and the benefits we've seen from this. So the release we're going to be looking at is our Young People Not in Education, Employment or Training, or NEET for short release, because it's one of the ones we've seen some of the biggest benefits on early on. So a bit of background about our team. So the majority of releases we put together use SAS code to some extent. And as mentioned, the biggest impact we've seen so far is from transforming our NEET release. So this release previously was a quarterly release with one larger release and 3 shorter releases throughout the year. And the process included a mix of SAS, Access and Excel to put together. So there's a lot of legacy software there being used to prepare this. And these last 2 points here were the 2 we really wanted to change when transforming this release. So rather than having one large release and 3 short ones throughout the year, we just wanted one release to make it more consistent. So it's easier for users, easier for us to put together, and then to get away from all of this legacy software. So no SAS, no Access, and a more limited use of Excel. So on the back of that then, this was the whole process and how the release was put together. So initially we had several SAS scripts we had to run, which gave us a number of Excel outputs. These were then fed into a separate Excel sheet to transform the data and the way it's formatted. This then fed into an Access database, which then fed back out into Excel in order to produce the tables and charts. And we then had a separate ethnicity SAS script to run, which then fed into an ethnicity Excel spreadsheet in order to get the breakdowns on ethnicity. And all of this then fed into updating our release and updating our Excel tables, which we publish alongside the release on our website. So as you can see, there's a lot of steps in there. There's a lot of manual work with copying and pasting, dragging formulas between the Excel files, data going into Access and back out of Access, and a number of separate SAS scripts. So there's a lot of manual processes and it took quite a lot of time to run through. So on the transformation work we've done so far, we've managed to cut the release down to this in terms of the process. So all of these red bubbles here are now no longer needed. They're cut from the process. And it's essentially a case of we run the R code. This gives us the data we need to update some charts in Excel. This then feeds into the release and our web tables. So it's a much faster process and there's lots that have been cut out from there. And it's a lot of manual steps as well. So we don't need to move formulas around anymore. There's no copying and pasting data between Excel sheets and the like. It's much more streamlined and much nicer to work with. That being said, it's still not perfect. We also want to get the charts into the R script when we have a chance to do so. So it'll be even more streamlined from that point, going straight from the R script right through to updating our releases. So on the back of that, then we thought it'd be worth just running through some of the common questions we tend to get around transforming our releases. So more specifically, why was this important for us to do? And what was the trigger for us to actually start this transformation process? How did we start the process and get it going? How many people were involved? How long did it take us to actually run through the process? What improvements have we seen? And any additional takeaways or unexpected impacts that we've seen after going through the process. So to start with, why was it important for us to do this work? So as Alex has already mentioned, within Welsh Government, we have a drive to move away from SaaS and legacy software at the moment and incorporate other pieces of software. So that was one of the main drivers there. In addition, for our team specifically, we also find it's much easier to find resources for R and Python given they're open source compared to SaaS when needing things online. So for instance, if you're looking for solutions to problems or trying to find training or development materials, we personally found it much easier to find resource for that online compared to specific pieces of licensed software like SaaS. In addition to that, as already noted, we wanted to update the format of our neat release. Rather than having one long release and 3 short releases throughout the year, we wanted to make it more consistent with the same release each quarter. So this felt like the appropriate time to do that because we could update the code base, change it to R, and change the release formatting at the same time. In addition to that, our team is more comfortable with R than SaaS. That's not to say we're SaaS experts. We did come into this with relatively limited knowledge, but we did have slightly more R experience than SaaS at this point. So it made more sense for our team to be able to build it in this code base rather than using SaaS. As already noted, it also improves the efficiency of our release. So being able to chop out a lot of manual steps, no longer need access, no longer need as many Excel documents, and also having the code base itself be more efficient, so fewer lines of code to do the same level of work. And an important one, which I think sometimes gets overlooked, is the reduced capacity for human error. So when we have all of these Excel steps with copying and pasting data, moving formulas around, it's very easy just to miss things by 1 row or accidentally copy the wrong figure, and at which point your end calculations can be wrong, and that will impact your final release. Having everything wrapped up in an R code base, once that's been checked and you know it's okay and it runs fine, it's far harder to make those simple mistakes when doing it this way, which is a big benefit in the future. So alongside that, then, how do we get this process started? So initially, me and the team developed our R skills on ad hoc requests before starting on full process transformations. So within our team, we tend to get requests for small pieces of data, which can often take 1 to 2 hours to calculate, just small, simple requests. So undertaking this work on R first was a big benefit because it allowed us to develop our R skills in our environment and on the data sets we use. I always find personally that the online training sessions are really useful to understand how to use programming languages to begin with, but transferring it to your own actual data and your own work that you do is quite challenging. So starting with smaller requests like this, which didn't take too long, was a really good way to build that confidence in using it on our systems. So in addition to that, we also had to understand the SAS code for the NEATS release. So we took this over from a different team within Welsh Government, the post-16 stats education team. So before we could start transforming the process, we had to delve into the SAS code and really understand what it was actually doing, going through it line by line, and really making sure we understood the fine detail of the code. And ultimately, on the back of this, then it was deciding whether to replicate the SAS code 1-to-1. If it's just a case of getting off SAS to R, do we want to just transfer the SAS portion to R? Or do we want to update that, bring more into the R code, and change how we're going to get the release sorted? So within our situation, as already mentioned, we wanted to change the formatting of our release. So we already knew we wanted to make additional changes to the code base. So in our case, it was understanding, okay, what final product do we want? And then working backwards from there to understand what we actually need to get out of R. And luckily, in our case, for this particular release, it was just based on one data source, so it was relatively straightforward, fortunately. I know if you have multiple data sources which are merging from different places and calculations have to be done in a certain way, it can be more challenging. So in terms of how many people are involved then, so there's 2 people for this specific NEATS release. So 1 to draft the code and then 1 to QA the code. Personally, within our team, we found it much better for each individual to have their own release they solely focused on, and then we swapped with someone else in order to check the code. Obviously, this is going to depend on the size of the release, the size of the code base, and how different teams work. But personally, within our team, we all found it much easier to focus on one release specifically, rather than trying to juggle multiple at the same time, or trying to pick up from wherever the people have left off. Being able to just power through one release with your focus solely on that, and then swap to QA we found it much more efficient and easier for us to do. And then on the back of this, we've all developed much stronger R skills because of it, we think. Being able to transform releases from start to finish and understanding that full process because we've worked on whole releases has been really beneficial for us to do. In terms of how long it took for this release in particular, it took us 1 full day of programming to develop the R code we've got so far. So in addition to each focusing on our own releases, our team tend to find it easier to code in large sessions as well. So for this particular reason, I just blocked off a whole day in my calendar and basically just focused solely on this for an entire day. I personally find it hard if you leave code after short sessions and then come back to it to try and figure out where you've got to, what you're working on, and get back in that headspace. I find it much easier just to really power through and get lots done in one session because you get locked into that headspace. And that said, though, there's still lots we want to add to our processes, and the process is still ongoing. So the charts, as already mentioned, we do want to incorporate into our R code. And in addition to that, the Excel web tables we publish alongside our release in Excel format, we want to switch to incorporating into a SQL database that will feed into our online web platform, Wales, to streamline that process, again, reduce more human error and make it more efficient and easier to do. So what improvements have we seen from this transformation so far then? So the big one, as Alex has already touched on, is the time saving. So for this particular release, we've reduced the time needed to run it from around half a day to 30 minutes to get all the figures and the charts we need to update the release. So previously, with all the manual steps and feeding into different software, so Access, Excel, multiple SAS scripts, it took us around half a day to run through this, whereas now it takes essentially 30 minutes, update the R code to focus on the latest periods, press run, and that gives us all the figures we need. In addition to that, again, as we already touched on, reduced capacity for human error, with far fewer manual steps now. It's much more difficult to make simple mistakes when going through the process. Another benefit we've seen is it's easier to QA once the code base has been initially cleared. So once we know the code is doing what it's supposed to be doing and the figures are all correct on the output, we know that's the case in future. It's going to be a case of essentially checking the correct periods being ran for and no variables need to be updated. So there's far less manual steps of checking all the processes throughout Excel and Access like was done previously, which makes it much more efficient, not just to run, but to also check in future, which is a really big benefit. And then lastly, we've also seen the code base itself become more efficient as opposed to the overall release. So a lot of the SAS scripts we use for our releases in Welsh Gov tend to have been around for quite a while. So as the releases evolve, people add things to the SAS code, things get taken out, and they tend to become a bit unwieldy and have a lot in there which isn't necessarily needed. So the R code we've got now does more analysis than the SAS code did previously, with far fewer lines. So the code itself is much more efficient, which also makes it easier for people to come and understand what the code is doing if we have new starters in the team, for instance, or if the code gets shared elsewhere. So the main takeaways and other impacts we've seen from this then, so as I already touched on, is helped further develop our skills and coding processes, specifically end-to-end releases as well. While I think it's really worthwhile working on small requests to build that R code, that R skills in your own environment, it doesn't necessarily give you that full end-to-end process of starting a release right the way through to publication. So us working on transforming these releases has given us that ability there. It's also given us a better understanding of the methodology of the release. So specifically for this release, as I mentioned, we inherited this release from a separate team alongside the SAS code. And this really forced us to go into that SAS code in detail and understand what was being done. And it removes that tendency to sometimes receive SAS code that's been used in the past. You know it works, but you don't necessarily understand what it's doing specifically. And it forces us to really get to grips with what's happening in the release rather than just running what's been there before. And then lastly, which is one I don't think you always realise until you start going through the processes, is that there's always more that can be added and improved upon, and it's a never-ending process. It's obviously an iterative process. There's always things you can think of to add extra. So in our case, the charts and the Excel web tables we want to change. But as you start going through those points, I'm sure we'll think of plenty more to go through from there. And yeah, I think it's one of those things you don't always realise until you start working through transforming releases. So hopefully that was a useful bit of information there on sort of the questions of how we've got started with our releases and why we've gone through it. I know I've not shared any code specifics here, but if anyone does have any questions on the actual code we've used and put together, feel free to drop me an email. I'm more than happy to run through that in more detail if that would be useful. But yeah, otherwise, has anyone got any questions?
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Joel. That's really helpful. Brought it to life a bit there to see the you know what you're actually doing, and for me the steps that you've cut out to make things more efficient, that's just amazing. And from half a day down to half an hour, that's fantastic. So the chat has been alive, and Alex has been very busy in the background typing away there. I'm just going to call out a few of these, if that's okay, to see if you want to, or you or Alex want to comment on these any more. But also, if there's anyone in the audience listening that wants to ask a question that you haven't typed in the chat, please feel free to do so. Put your hand up, and we'll come to you. So the first one's right back at the beginning. Kevin Mears said about how he loves the way that training was central to the transformation, and I'm head of skills, and I think that's critical as well. You know, it's really, really important to get that training right and that support right as people are working their way through any kind of transition like this. But the question was, does it feel less like a project and a shift in practice? I don't know if Joe or Alex, do you want to come in?
I think so. We're looking at this as a transformation program, just purely from the size of it, and obviously based on the skills and capabilities that we have across our department, they do vary quite considerably. So it is a project because we are trying to do it as one complete department rather than just sort of mini pieces of work, if that makes sense. Have I understood your question properly?
I don't know. Kevin, if you're still with us, do you want to come back in on any of that? Do you want to clarify, or are you okay?
I guess it's a project working towards shifting practice. I guess it's both, which is really unhelpful. I'm sorry. But, you know, hopefully once this program has been completed and we've been able to, you know, develop our colleagues' skills and support them where they need that support in order to transform their systems, then the way that we work will have shifted. But at the moment, it's what we're doing in order to work towards that, which is making it more of a project.
Makes sense. Thank you. Hope that's okay for Kevin. And we had a comment from James, who works with me, looking at capabilities and defining the skills and capabilities that you need. So I'm reading that James is going to get in touch. I'd love to hear some more about that, to be honest, but we won't dominate the discussion now. And I think you've been answering Howell back and forth about the IDE that's being used. So that's okay. Kevin asked as well about who takes responsibility for documenting things. I don't know if you've answered that yet.
No, I started answering and then we got to this questions part, so
Okay.
I thought I'd just say it now. So as I mentioned, every team has ultimate responsibility for their processes and documenting what has changed. Now, we are encouraging and adopting the use of Azure DevOps for version control of code. And we have also established what we're calling the CAS code checklist. So where teams have developed new code, it's almost like signing that up, getting that signed off by another person who is of a certain level of coding experience. So some teams are obviously working through this, but they would still like that code to be QA'd potentially by someone with a little bit more experience using certain programs. So we've established a checklist as well for teams to use that essentially like signs off any code that they have developed, just to give them that peace of mind that what they have done is correct, essentially, because there's always a kind of question mark around how we QA some of this stuff. And that's, so we put that in place to help teams with that. But ultimately, it's the teams themselves who have responsibility for documenting any changes between versions.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So I think that covers Dave's question about version control as well. So that's spot on. Thank you very much. Joe's mentioned the IDEs. That's okay. Right, we've got Steve Hopkins. Hi, Steve. Alex and Joe, being part of WG, but outside of the CAS team, is aware of a lot of the work that's gone on in the transformation. The pace of it's truly impressive, especially considering scale and scope. Any elements you found more challenging than expected?
Let me jump in on this one. It's a slightly boring answer, but the capacity is the one we've struggled most with in our team specifically. So capacity to find the time to do the transformations in the first place. Fortunately, a lot of our team have some coding experience, whether that's Python or R. As I said, it was relatively limited to start with, but we built that up quite quickly, which has been very useful, obviously. But finding the time to actually go through these transformations has been the most difficult bit. As I mentioned, for the one I mentioned in the case study, it took a whole day of work to go through, which isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. But finding the time to block off a whole day along with sort of planning what we want to change and figure out how we're going to change it, alongside juggling the day-to-day work for our normal releases and requests. That's been the most difficult bit for our team specifically. But yeah, I appreciate it's a little bit of a boring answer because it's not very data sciencey, but yeah.
I think in terms of the wider program, and so I personally am on the capability work stream, so I'm going to speak to that. My other colleagues aren't here, but I think the one thing that we found very challenging at the beginning is obviously the spread of skill across the department and how we, for want of a better phrase, dished out the skills and the expertise that we had. So the way that we did that for phase 1, because getting off those SaaS processes and therefore saving some money by not having to buy as many licenses was very important to us. We want to be as efficient and effective as we possibly can be. So we identified individuals within the department by doing a skills audit. And if they identified themselves as either intermediate or, I think we used the term expert, we've moved away from that because no one likes to call themselves an expert. But essentially, if you were one of the top 2 kind of in the skills level and you were willing or able to help other teams with their processes, we looked to try and free up some capacity for those individuals to essentially parachute them in to the teams that needed that help. So that was a challenge in kind of working out the logistics of all of that. But that approach worked incredibly well because not only did those colleagues who have the coding experience get a bit of a challenge to kind of build on their skills themselves, they also worked alongside the teams who already own those processes and helped upskill them at the same time. So there was some real benefit in that across kind of all things. But it was definitely a challenge kind of setting that up in the first place and working out the best way to deploy that resource.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Right, I think we're nearly there now. Kevin's come back to say it's an open plan office, can't answer verbally, but thanks for that, Kevin. Great. And enjoying as an interested bystander all about the processes and all change. We've got Dave asking, let's have a read. Anticipating a big challenge for you moving away from access, knowing that access is currently required for hundreds of data sets for Stats Wales. Obviously, SW3 is in development, which will remove the need for MS Access, so something else can be used instead. Any thought how we'll tackle the challenge of removing the beast that is MS Access?
Short answer is we don't know right now. Obviously, it is something that we are aware of and working with our Stats Wales 3 colleagues regularly. So I think that is still in the development phase. Obviously, it has been being developed for a while now. So once we have a better understanding of how everything will speak to each other, we will then have a better understanding of sort of how we'll tackle the challenge, as Dave has called it, of removing Microsoft Access. But there's still a number of processes across our department that use Access that are not linked to Stats Wales. So at the moment, that's what we've focused on or asked teams to focus on while we kind of wait for those developments.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right. Questions in the chat have slowed down a little bit. Last chance for everybody else. I've got one question, if that's okay, and it's a bit of a cheeky one because my other hat is AI lead here, and I talk to lots of people about AI. It seems to be all the time at the moment. I'm just wondering if there's any impact or any benefit or anything that's been of any use to you in terms of using AI to help with the coding or learning the coding or any of that. Is there anything going on with AI?
So for one of our releases we've been working on, we have used Copilot to some degree to help transform the SAS to R. So one of the coders that was helping us with this had very little SAS knowledge, but was a really excellent R coder. So they struggled to necessarily understand what was happening in the SAS code, but they could have written it in R quite comfortably. So they used Copilot to help make that transition there, which I've been told was very, very useful. So that's a bit of a positive there. It didn't necessarily recreate the code perfectly. We still had to tweak it. AI is not 100% at shifting from one code base to another, but it did help give you a bit of a gist of what it's doing in R, so it's more understandable. You can digest it if you understand R, but not SAS, for instance. So that's the only instance I've had indirect experience with personally. But yeah, it has been positive.
Fascinating, thank you. Yeah, you hear so much hype about it. Now it's going to, remove the need to code and all the rest of it, and like, we're nowhere near that yet. But fascinating. Oh, we've got one last question come in. General question. This is from Frank. We have 9 data collections from our contacts in the authorities that use Excel. Will there be a different system, maybe MS Forms, that they would use instead?
I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I mean, we're obviously dealing with this program generally, I guess, what most systems and processes are adopting. I think, Frank, your example there is probably one of the more specific situations that we'd want to have a better understanding of how things are collected before we could determine how best we transform that. So I can pick that up with you offline, if that helps.
Sounds like a good offer there, Frank. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Right, I guess we're coming towards the end of things now. Thank you very, very much indeed to Alex and Joe. Much appreciated. That was fascinating stuff. So we've got a couple of slides just to finish off. Elise is before me and she's already put the links in the chat, and you can see there's an event feedback QR code on screen. Really, really helps us in terms of organizing the sessions and finding out what works for you and what you'd like things to be different, if there's anything. So if you could take a couple of moments to fill in the survey, please, that would be much appreciated. And I've got one more advert, I think. So hopefully everybody's been quick enough on the draw and got a quick scan of that QR code, or the links are in the chat. But if you go on to the next slide, here we are, that's it. This is a quick advert, essentially, for some guidance, because as I mentioned, AI is everywhere, lots of guidance out there, but we have on the CDPS site the first draft of some AI guidance for public sector in Wales, and it's in beta phase, so we're looking for feedback. So if you're at all interested in the advice, it's been adapted from UK government guidance, but made more specific for Wales, please have a look and click on the button, the beta button, where you can give us feedback on the guidance, please. Oh, there's links in the chat as well. Okay, fantastic. Diolch yn fawr, Elise. Okay, well, I think we're pretty much there. Let's wrap it up and grab some lunch. Diolch yn fawr I chi gyd. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for being here, and massive thank you to Joe and Alex. All right, we'll call it a day. That's a wrap. Thanks very much, everyone. Hwyl fawr, take care, and we'll see you at the next seminar. Thank you.